are so expensive because professors sit on golden toilets and sew platinum elbow patches or cashmere elbow patches on their jackets. I don't know where yours is at the dry cleaners, I assume. Can you pull up the first quote? This is a quote from the book. The forces driving tuition higher are mostly external to the colleges and universities themselves. They are broad economic forces that affect the entire economy, not just higher education. Now, this is obviously a dumb thing, but just something we can wrap our heads around. Can you pull up the second slide? The average, we're blocking it, but the average salary evidently for a professor is 157,000. Junior is 116. Mid is 157. So right off the bat, something that's just an easy macro example. It's not as if professors are making millions of dollars, right? This is pretty reasonable. So what's the truth here about why colleges are so expensive? Is it wasteful spending, or is it something else entirely?
Let me spend a minute explaining why personal services, and I like to compare higher education to child daycare. The kids are somewhat older, but I like to compare it to child daycare. We have achieved immense productivity growth, labor productivity growth. We get more stuff per hour worked in this country than we did 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 100 years ago. That's why our standard of living is so high. But all of that productivity growth, or most of it, is concentrated in mining, manufacturing, agriculture, where you produce stuff. It's much harder to get productivity growth, more output per hour worked in personal service. How would you get, being Socratic, how would you get labor productivity growth in child daycare? The only way you would do it is by stuffing more kids in with each caregiver.
Right.
That's not productivity growth. That's quality deterioration. So that's the problem. Service industries, higher education is a service, dental care is a service, legal services is a service, daycare is a service, your prisons are a service, your psychologist is a service, and they're personal services. It's really hard to get labor productivity growth in these industries, and it's labor productivity growth that holds down cost. So if you look at the price index for goods, sort of flat. If you look at the price index for services, upward trending. And the consumer price index is an average of those two. So services are pulling up prices because it's hard to get labor productivity growth. It's not being driven by my elbow patches. Faculty salaries have not risen any more rapidly than average incomes in the country as a whole. And overall, faculty incomes have risen much less. I've seen statistics that faculty salaries in real dollars, inflation adjusted, are about 10% higher than they were 50 years ago,
which is crazy.
Now well, in other words, they're rising more slowly than average incomes in the country, but that masks something else, which is why, lies are just nuance. The professoriate has changed over time. Most people think of the elbow patched, pipe smoking, tenured professor, but that's now a minority of the teaching profession. So salaries, if you look at salaries at the best institutions that follow the old model, those salaries have increased quite a lot. But there's been an increasing reliance in higher education on what are sometimes itinerant professors, temporary, adjunct. And unfortunately, this is concentrated at the schools that deal with the most vulnerable student populations, America's lowest income students. Where's the old model working well? At all those schools with those very expensive prices. So one of the big problems we have in higher education is this division of higher education into the haves and the have-nots. And have-not schools are dealing with the have-not kids. Right. That's a problem.
You know what? A great thing your book does, and I've thought about this a lot, is you explain the dangers of averages. Because, and that's such a brilliant point. You make the point about rising sea levels. And it's a perfect illustration. We're not in college. Averages are, it's kind of lying with statistics, because the difference is this contrast is so stark that the average is almost meaningless. And I think part of it too is spending. So I listened to this 4-part series, Malcolm Gladwell's Revisionist History. They talked about the college, higher education in the United States. A lot of it has to do with recruiting too. Like, you need really good food. You need really good dormitories. You need really good quads. And so it's like, in order to pull in the students that can pay the tuition, that's going to pay the bills, you need to invest in the product itself. And I don't think people realize that.
They don't. the issue is whether the investment in amenities is excessive.
Right.
It's not the engine of higher college costs. You know, fancy dorms. We don't live in spas. That is not the engine of college cost. But at the schools that want to pull in students who come from families who can afford the full list price,
Yeah.
those are the schools that you will see investing in a somewhat better package of housing and dining and other amenities.
Yeah.
And we can argue that that's excessive, but well, that's being driven by something that is beyond colleges. It's being driven by a fact. And the fact is that the American distribution of income today doesn't look like the distribution of income in 1960. In 1960, it was more bunched in the middle. Today, it's it's like you've taken the distribution of income from both ends and tugged it. You have more in the rich end and more in the poor end. And schools that are trying to, for revenue purposes, have a solid core of students from the right tail of the income distribution have to offer lifestyle amenities that, while not as good as home, are at least acceptable.